The autumn rain hammered against the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Sergeant Marcus Thompson made his routine evening patrol. 23 years of service had taught him to notice things others missed. Tonight, something felt different. As he walked past the Queen's former private study, a faint orange glow caught his attention through the gap under the heavy oak door. His heart skipped a beat. No one should be in there. The room had been sealed since Queen Elizabeth's passing, preserved exactly as she left it. Marcus pressed his ear to the door and heard the soft crackle of flames. Panic shot through him as he imagined a fire spreading through the ancient castle. Without hesitation, he pushed open the door, ready to sound the alarm. What he saw instead made him freeze in shock. Queen Camilla stood before the grand fireplace, her back turned to him. In her hands were stacks of cream-colored envelopes with the distinctive royal seal. One by one, she was feeding them to the hungry flames. The flickering light danced across her face, revealing an expression Marcus had never seen before. Gone was the composed public smile. In its place was something desperate, almost frantic. Her movements were quick and nervous as she grabbed another handful of letters from a wooden box on the nearby desk. Marcus tried to step back quietly, but his boot creaked against the old floorboard. Camilla spun around, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the continued crackling of the fire consuming what appeared to be decades of correspondence. "Your Majesty," Marcus managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. His training told him to leave immediately, but something about the scene held him captive. These weren't just any papers. The elaborate handwriting visible on the unburned letters looked remarkably similar to Queen Elizabeth's distinctive script. Camilla's face quickly shifted back to its practiced royal composure. But Marcus had already seen too much. "Sergeant Thompson," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I was simply disposing of some old papers. Nothing more, but Marcus knew better. In his years of service, he had delivered countless messages and documents to Queen Elizabeth. He recognized her handwriting, her personal seal, even the specific cream-colored paper she preferred for private correspondence. These weren't just any old papers. They were the late Queen's personal letters. The wooden box on the desk was ornate, carved with the royal coat of arms. It looked like something that had been hidden away for years, perhaps decades. How had Camilla found it? And more importantly, why was she destroying its contents in secret? As Marcus stood there, his mind raced with questions. The Queen Consort continued feeding letters to the fire, each one disappearing into ash and smoke. Some letters were thick, suggesting lengthy correspondence. Others were brief notes, but all bore the unmistakable signs of Queen Elizabeth's personal touch. "Perhaps I should help you with that." "Your Majesty," Marcus offered carefully, stepping closer to get a better look. But Camilla quickly closed the wooden box and moved it away from his view. "That won't be necessary," she replied firmly. "This is a private matter that requires discretion." The word discretion hung heavy in the air between them. Marcus understood the implication, but his loyalty had always been to the crown itself, not to any individual wearing it. Queen Elizabeth had trusted him with many secrets over the years, and he had never betrayed that trust. But this felt different. As he watched more letters turn to ash, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being lost forever. These could be historical documents, personal thoughts from one of Britain's longest-reigning monarchs, or correspondence that might change how people understood the royal family. The fire continued to burn, and with each letter that disappeared, Marcus felt the weight of what he was witnessing. He was looking at what might be the systematic destruction of Queen Elizabeth's private papers. Papers that by all rights should probably be preserved in the royal archives. Camilla seemed to sense his discomfort. "Some things are better left in the past, Sergeant," she said without looking at him. The Queen understood this. She wouldn't want certain personal matters to become public. But Marcus wondered if Queen Elizabeth had really wanted these letters destroyed, or if this was Camilla's own decision. The desperate way she fed the flames suggested this wasn't a calm, planned activity, but something urgent and secret. As the last of the evening light faded outside, Marcus realized he was witnessing something that could change everything. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Marcus couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his modest quarters within the castle grounds, staring at the ceiling as rain continued to pelt his window. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Camilla's face in the firelight, desperate and determined as she fed those letters to the flames. By morning, His duty roster felt like torture. Every interaction with other staff members made him wonder if they could see the secret written across his face. During the changing of the guard, his colleague James noticed his distraction. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Marcus," James commented as they walked the castle's long corridors. "Everything all right?" Marcus forced a smile. "Just tired. Long night patrol," but James had known him for 15 years. "Come on, mate. What's really eating at you?" The temptation to share the burden was overwhelming, but Marcus knew better. Royal protection wasn't just about physical security. It was about protecting reputations, secrets, and the very foundations of the monarchy itself. Yet what he had witnessed felt like something bigger than just another royal secret. Throughout the day, Marcus found excuses to walk past Queen Elizabeth's former study. The room was locked again, showing no signs of the previous night's activities. But he noticed something that made his stomach clench. A faint smell of ash still lingered in the corridor. During his afternoon break, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He walked to the castle's administrative wing and requested access to the guest log from the previous evening. As a senior security officer, he had the clearance to review movement records. What he found troubled him even more. According to the official logs, Queen Camilla had not been scheduled to visit that wing of the castle. There was no record of her requesting access to Queen Elizabeth's study. Officially, she had never been there. This meant either the logs were incomplete or Camilla had deliberately avoided the usual protocols. For someone of her position to move through the castle unrecorded suggested careful planning and a desire for secrecy that went beyond normal privacy concerns. Marcus also discovered something else that made his blood run cold. The wooden box he had seen wasn't listed in any of the official inventories of Queen Elizabeth's belongings. After her death, every item in her private rooms had been carefully catalogued by palace archivists. Either they had missed something significant, or the box had been hidden so well that even the professional archivists couldn't find it. That evening, Marcus volunteered for extra patrol duty. He needed to know if this was a one-time occurrence or part of a pattern. As he made his rounds, he paid special attention to any unusual activities in the sealed sections of the castle. Around midnight, his persistence paid off. He spotted a figure moving quietly through the shadows near the servants' entrance. Even in the dim light, he recognized Camilla's distinctive silhouette. She was carrying what looked like a small suitcase or box. Marcus followed at a safe distance, using his knowledge of the castle's layout to stay hidden. Camilla moved with surprising familiarity through corridors that most people, even royals, rarely used. She clearly knew exactly where she was going. She stopped at a door Marcus recognized. It led to the castle's old record room, a place where historical documents had been stored for decades. The room wasn't part of the regular patrol route because it was considered low-priority storage. Most staff members had probably forgotten it existed. From his hiding spot behind a stone pillar, Marcus watched as Camilla unlocked the door with a key she produced from her coat pocket. The fact that she had a key to this forgotten room raised even more questions. How long had she been planning this? What else had she been accessing without official records? The light from her small flashlight revealed shelves lined with old boxes and filing cabinets. Marcus watched as she placed her suitcase on a dusty table and began removing what looked like more letters and documents. These appeared different from the ones she had burned the night before, older, with different handwriting. As she worked, Marcus caught glimpses of the documents in the flashlight beam. Some looked like they dated back decades, possibly to the early years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. Others appeared more recent, but were written in handwriting he didn't recognize. Camilla's movements were methodical now, more controlled than the frantic burning he had witnessed. She was sorting through the documents, separating them into different piles. Some went back into the suitcase, others were set aside, and a few were placed in what looked like a burn pile. Marcus realized he was watching the systematic review and potential destruction of historical documents that might never have been officially cataloged. This wasn't just about burning a few personal letters. This was about controlling historical narrative on a much larger scale. The implications were staggering. If these documents contained sensitive information about the royal family's history, their destruction could alter how future historians understood decades of British royal life. But Marcus also understood that some secrets might be destroyed for good reason, to protect people who were still alive, or to prevent information that could destabilize the monarchy. As Camilla continued her work, Marcus faced an impossible choice. His oath was to protect the crown, but which version of the crown? The institution that valued transparency and historical preservation, or the individuals who might need protection from their own past? The weight of what he knew was becoming unbearable, and Marcus realized that his decision about what to do next would define not just his career, but possibly the future of the monarchy itself. Marcus spent the next 3 days in agony. Every conversation felt like walking on thin ice. Every glance from Camilla during official functions made him wonder if she suspected he knew more than he should. The weight of his discovery was affecting his work, his sleep, and his relationships with fellow guards. On Thursday morning, everything changed. Marcus was reviewing security footage from the previous week when he noticed something that made his hands shake. The timestamp showed Camilla entering the sealed wing not just twice but 7 times over the past month. Each visit was carefully timed to avoid regular patrols and staff rotations. This wasn't a desperate, spur-of-the-moment decision to burn a few letters. This was a calculated, long-term operation to systematically remove or destroy documents from Queen Elizabeth's private collection. The planning required intimate knowledge of castle security, staff schedules, and the location of materials that weren't even supposed to exist. Marcus made a decision that terrified him. He needed to see what was left in that record room. Using his security clearance during a quiet afternoon shift, he made his way to the forgotten storage area. His hands trembled as he unlocked the door, knowing that what he found might change everything. The room looked different than it had during Camilla's midnight visit. Several boxes that had been full were now nearly empty. File cabinets that had been locked were standing open, their contents clearly disturbed. But what caught Marcus's attention was something Camilla had apparently missed, a single letter that had fallen behind one of the cabinets. The envelope bore Queen Elizabeth's personal seal, but the handwriting was different. As Marcus carefully opened it, his heart nearly stopped. The letter was addressed to Queen Elizabeth from Princess Diana, dated just 3 months before her death in 1997. The contents were explosive. Diana wrote about her fears for her safety, her concerns about certain members of the royal family, and most shocking of all, her suspicions about surveillance and potential threats to her life. She mentioned having documented evidence of conversations and meetings that could embarrass senior royals. But the most devastating part was Diana's final paragraph. She wrote that she had given copies of sensitive documents to Queen Elizabeth for safekeeping, trusting that the Queen would ensure the truth came out if anything happened to her. Diana specifically mentioned a safe deposit box and a trusted friend who had additional copies as insurance. Marcus read the letter 3 times, each reading making him feel sicker. If this letter was authentic, it suggested that Queen Elizabeth had been holding potentially explosive information about Diana's death for over 25 years. And now Camilla was systematically destroying any evidence of its existence. The implications were staggering. Was Camilla acting on her own, or had she been instructed to clean up these dangerous secrets? Did King Charles know what his wife was doing? And most importantly, what other documents had already been destroyed? Marcus carefully photographed the letter with his phone, his hands shaking so badly he had to take several shots to get a clear image. Then he faced another impossible decision. Should he put the letter back where he found it or take it as evidence? Before he could decide, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Panic shot through him as he quickly folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He managed to lock the door and walk casually down the corridor just as James appeared around the corner. "Marcus, been looking for you everywhere. There's an issue with the new security system in the East Wing." "Right behind you," Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded normal. But as they walked, he could feel the letter burning against his chest like a guilty secret. That evening, Marcus sat in his quarters with the letter spread on his small desk. Under the harsh light of his reading lamp, Diana's handwriting looked even more real, more urgent. Her words about fear and surveillance felt prophetic, given what had happened to her just months later. But Marcus also realized something else. The letter mentioned specific dates and meetings that could be verified. If Diana had been telling the truth about having evidence, And if she had shared copies with others, then somewhere out there, the truth might still exist. Marcus began researching using his personal computer. He looked up news reports from 1997, archived interviews, and court documents related to Diana's death. What he found supported some of Diana's claims about feeling watched and threatened, but nothing conclusive. Then he remembered something Diana had written about a trusted friend with copies of documents. After hours of searching, he found references to Diana's relationship with several people who had spoken out about conspiracies after her death. One name kept appearing, a journalist who had claimed to have documents from Diana, but had been dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. Marcus found the journalist's contact information, but calling him would cross a line he couldn't uncross. Once he made contact with someone outside the palace, he would be committing to exposing whatever truth he uncovered. As he sat staring at the phone number, Marcus realized that Camilla's midnight burning sessions might only be the beginning. If she was destroying evidence related to Diana's death, what else might she be hiding? And how many other people knew the truth but were staying silent? The next morning brought a new development that made Marcus's blood run cold. During the morning briefing, the head of security announced that the old record room would be completely cleared out and renovated within the week. All remaining documents would be transferred to a secure facility off-site. Marcus understood immediately what this meant. Camilla wasn't just destroying individual letters. She was orchestrating the complete elimination of any evidence that the secret documents had ever existed. Once the room was cleared and renovated, there would be no trace of what had been stored there for decades. Time was running out, and Marcus realized he had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. Stay silent and protect his career, or risk everything to expose a truth that could shake the monarchy to its foundations. Marcus made the call on Friday night. Sitting in his car in a supermarket parking lot 20 miles from Windsor, he dialed the number he had found for investigative journalist Robert Hayes. His hands were sweating as the phone rang, knowing that this conversation would change everything. "Hayes speaking," came a gruff voice on the other end. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Marcus Thompson. I work at Windsor Castle, and I believe you might be interested in some information about Princess Diana." There was a long pause. "Who did you say you were?" "I'm a royal protection officer. I've discovered something that relates to claims you made years ago about Diana having evidence before her death." Another pause, then Hayes's voice became sharp and focused. "Can you prove who you are?" Marcus had anticipated this. He gave Hayes specific details about recent royal events that only someone with inside access would know. After a tense 10-minute conversation, Hayes agreed to meet him the following evening at a pub in Reading, far enough from Windsor to avoid recognition. The next 24 hours were torture. Marcus went through his duties mechanically, terrified that every glance from a colleague meant his secret was exposed. During a routine security meeting, Camilla's private secretary mentioned that the Queen Consort would be traveling to Scotland for the weekend, which gave Marcus some relief. Saturday evening, Marcus arrived at the Crown and Anchor pub 30 minutes early. He chose a corner table where he could see both entrances and ordered a pint he didn't want. When Robert Hayes walked in, Marcus recognized him immediately from online photos. A thin man in his 60s with sharp eyes and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades chasing difficult stories. Hayes sat down without ordering a drink. "Show me what you've got." Marcus slid the photographed letter across the table. Hayes put on reading glasses and studied it carefully, his expression growing more intense with each line. After several minutes, he looked up with excitement barely contained in his voice. "Do you understand what this is?" "I think so," Marcus replied quietly. "But I need to know, did Diana really give you documents?" Hayes leaned forward, speaking barely above a whisper. "She gave me copies of several letters and recordings, but after her death I was pressured to destroy them. Anonymous threats, legal warnings, suggestions that my career would be over if I pursued the story. I was young and scared, so I backed down. But you kept copies?" "I kept one recording." Diana talking about her fears, mentioning specific conversations she had overheard about making her disappear quietly. "I never published it because I couldn't verify the voices she claimed to recognize. But what you've shown me matches exactly what she told me." Marcus felt the room spinning. What did she overhear? According to Diana, She accidentally walked in on a phone conversation between two senior royals discussing how to handle the Diana problem. She said they were talking about making it look like an accident, something that couldn't be traced back to the family. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Who were the royals? Hayes shook his head. She wouldn't tell me names on the recording. Said it was too dangerous. But she did say she had written everything down and given copies to Queen Elizabeth, trusting that the Queen would do the right thing if anything happened. Marcus thought about all the letters he had seen Camilla burning. What if Queen Elizabeth never had a chance to do anything? What if she died with that secret? Then someone else knew about it and decided it was too dangerous to keep, Hayes replied grimly. The question is, who gave the order to destroy the evidence? They sat in silence for several minutes, both understanding the implications. If Diana had been murdered on orders from within the royal family, and if evidence of that conspiracy had been hidden for over 25 years, they were dealing with something that could destroy the monarchy. There's something else, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. I've been tracking the security footage. The letter burning isn't random. It's systematic, and it's been going on for over a month. He showed Hayes the timestamps from Camilla's visits. Hayes studied the pattern, his investigative instincts clearly engaged. She's working to a deadline, Hayes observed. Look at the frequency, it's increasing. Something has made this urgent. Marcus had been wondering the same thing. What could have triggered this now? Think about it, Hayes said.
King Charles has been on the throne for over a year.
The transition period is ending, and they're settling into permanent roles. This might be their last chance to clean up any remaining secrets from Elizabeth's reign. Or, Marcus added with growing dread, someone found out about the documents and threatened to expose them. Hayes nodded grimly. That would explain the urgency. If there's a threat of exposure, they need to destroy the evidence quickly. They discussed what to do next. Hayes explained that without more evidence, the letter alone wouldn't be enough to prove anything. They needed either more documents or corroborating testimony from someone else who knew about the conspiracy. The recording I have is 26 years old, Hayes said. It's interesting, but not proof of murder. We need something that directly connects the royal family to Diana's death, or we need someone else to come forward with similar evidence. Marcus made a decision that terrified him. What if I could get you more documents before they're all destroyed? Hayes stared at him seriously. That would be theft. If you're caught, you'll face criminal charges and complete career destruction. Are you sure you want to risk that? Marcus thought about Diana's words in the letter, about her fears and her trust that the truth would eventually come out. Some things are more important than careers. They agreed to meet again in 3 days. Hayes would research the legal implications and possible ways to protect Marcus if he decided to obtain more evidence. Marcus would look for opportunities to access more documents before the room was cleared. As they left the pub separately, Marcus felt the weight of what he was planning. He was about to cross a line from passive observer to active participant in exposing what might be the biggest royal scandal in history. But as he drove back toward Windsor, he couldn't shake Diana's words from the letter. She had trusted Queen Elizabeth to ensure the truth came out. Now that the Queen was gone, maybe it was up to people like him to honor that trust, regardless of the personal cost. The question was whether he could succeed before Camilla destroyed all the evidence, and whether he could survive the consequences of trying. Marcus had one chance, and it came on Tuesday night. Camilla was attending a state dinner in London, and most of the senior staff were either with her or had gone home early. The skeleton crew working overnight shifts gave him the perfect opportunity. At 2 a.m., Marcus made his move. He had studied the patrol schedules and security camera rotations for days. There was a 12-minute window when the corridor leading to the record room would be unwatched. 12 minutes to get in, photograph as many documents as possible, and get out without leaving any trace. His heart hammered as he approached the door. The lock clicked softly and he slipped inside, immediately switching on a small red-filtered flashlight that wouldn't trigger the motion sensors. The room looked different than during his last visit. More boxes were empty, and several filing cabinets stood open and bare. Marcus worked quickly, photographing everything he could find. Most of the remaining documents seemed to be from the 1990s, and many bore Queen Elizabeth's personal seal. As he worked, he began to see a pattern that made his blood run cold. The documents weren't just random royal correspondence. They were specifically related to the period around Diana's death and its aftermath. There were letters discussing media management, public relations strategies, and what appeared to be legal advice about potential investigations. One document made him stop breathing entirely. It was a memo dated 2 weeks after Diana's death, written by a senior palace official to Queen Elizabeth. The subject line read, "Containment of potential evidence, action. Required," the memo discussed concerns about materials that could prove damaging if discovered by French investigators or British media. It mentioned specific steps to secure or dispose of sensitive items and recommended immediate action to prevent future complications. Marcus photographed the memo from multiple angles, making sure every word was clearly captured. This wasn't just evidence of a cover-up. It was proof that senior palace officials had actively worked to hide evidence related to Diana's death. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. In the bottom drawer of the last filing cabinet, Marcus found a sealed envelope marked, "For King Charles only, to be opened upon my death," in Queen Elizabeth's handwriting. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a brief letter from Queen Elizabeth to her son, along with a small key and what appeared to be a bank deposit box number. The letter was devastating. "My dearest Charles, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you must decide what to do with the burden I have carried for 25 years. Diana was right to be afraid. The evidence in box 447 will prove that her death was not an accident, but exposing it will destroy everything we have built. The choice of whether to seek justice or protect the crown must be yours alone. I pray you choose wisely." "Mother?" Marcus stared at the letter in disbelief. Queen Elizabeth had known the truth about Diana's death and had kept evidence of it in a safe deposit box for over 2 decades. She had left the ultimate decision about what to do with that evidence to Charles. The implications were staggering. If Charles had inherited this evidence and decided to bury it, then Camilla's document burning was likely being done with his knowledge and approval. The royal family wasn't just covering up a historical crime. They were actively choosing to let Diana's killers escape justice. Marcus photographed the letter and carefully noted the deposit box information. But as he sealed the envelope and prepared to leave, he heard something that made his heart stop: footsteps in the corridor outside. He quickly switched off his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall beside the door. The footsteps stopped directly outside the room. Marcus held his breath, waiting for the door to open and his career to end in disgrace. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on. Marcus waited another 5 minutes before carefully opening the door and checking the corridor. It was empty, but he had been reminded how dangerous his situation was. As he made his way back to his quarters, Marcus realized that what he had discovered changed everything. This wasn't just about exposing historical secrets. It was about ongoing crimes. If the royal family was actively suppressing evidence of murder, they were committing obstruction of justice every day they kept that evidence hidden. The next morning, Marcus called in sick for the first time in 3 years. He needed time to process what he had learned and decide what to do next. The evidence he had gathered was explosive, but it was also incredibly dangerous. He spent the day researching safe deposit box 447 and trying to identify which bank might be holding Diana's evidence. He also looked into legal protections for whistleblowers and tried to understand what would happen if he went public with what he knew. That evening, Hayes called him. "I've been thinking about our conversation. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" "I found more evidence," Marcus said quietly. "Much more, and it's worse than we thought." He arranged to meet Hayes again, this time at a different location. When they met the following night, Marcus showed Hayes the photographs he had taken. The journalist's face grew pale as he reviewed each image. "This is explosive," Hayes whispered, "but it's also incredibly dangerous. If what Queen Elizabeth wrote is true, and there's additional evidence in that safe deposit box, we're talking about proof of royal involvement in murder. So what do we do?" Hayes was quiet for a long time, clearly weighing the risks. "We need to find that safe deposit box before they do. If Charles hasn't already emptied it, the evidence inside could be the proof we need to expose the truth. And if he has emptied it, then we go with what we have and hope it's enough to force a real investigation." Marcus nodded, understanding that there was no turning back now. He had crossed the line from observer to active participant in exposing what might be the biggest scandal in royal history. But he also knew that Camilla's document burning was accelerating, and time was running out. Soon all the evidence would be destroyed, and the truth about Diana's death would be buried forever. The only question was whether two men with limited resources could expose a conspiracy that had been protected by the most powerful family in Britain for over 25 years. Finding safe deposit box 447 proved more difficult than Marcus and Hayes had expected. They spent 3 days calling banks across London, using carefully crafted stories about inheritance research. Most banks wouldn't provide any information without proper legal documentation, and several became suspicious of their inquiries. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Hayes remembered that Diana had mentioned in one of their conversations that she preferred to handle personal business at smaller private banks rather than the major institutions. After researching banks that had been operating in 1997, they focused on boutique financial services that catered to wealthy clients. On Friday morning, Hayes called Weatherby Private Banking, a small firm in Kensington that specialized in discreet financial services for high-net-worth individuals. When he mentioned inquiry about Box 447, there was a telling pause before the manager said they would need to call back with proper authorization. "That's it," Hayes told Marcus when they met that afternoon. The pause gave it away. They have the box, but they're being careful about who has access. Meanwhile, Marcus was dealing with increasing pressure at work. The renovation of the record room had begun ahead of schedule, and workers were clearing out the remaining contents. Marcus watched helplessly as boxes that might have contained crucial evidence were loaded onto trucks for disposal. Worse, Camilla had returned from Scotland and seemed more agitated than usual. During a routine security briefing, she asked specific questions about surveillance coverage of the sealed areas of the castle. Marcus tried to remain calm, but he worried that she suspected someone had been accessing areas she thought were secure. That suspicion was confirmed on Saturday morning, when Marcus arrived for his shift to find that all locks in the castle's historical storage areas had been changed overnight. New security protocols were in place, and access now required approval from both the head of security and a member of the royal household. "They know someone's been poking around," Marcus told Hayes during an emergency meeting that evening. "We're running out of time." Hayes had news of his own. "I've been researching Weatherby Private Banking. They require either the original key holder or a properly executed legal authorization to access any safe deposit box. But there's something interesting. They haven't updated their record system since the 1990s. "What does that mean?" "It means they might not know that Diana is dead. Their files still list her as the primary account holder. If someone showed up with the right identification and the key from Queen Elizabeth's letter, they might allow access." Marcus stared at him. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm saying that if someone who looked enough like Diana walked into that bank with proper identification and the deposit box key, they might be able to access the contents before anyone realizes what's happening." The plan was risky beyond measure. Hayes had contacts in the underground world of document forgers, people who specialized in creating convincing identification for journalists working undercover. With the right preparation, they might be able to create documents that would fool a bank employee long enough to access the box. But they needed someone who could believably impersonate Diana, and they needed the actual key from Queen Elizabeth's letter. Marcus realized he would have to make another trip into the castle's restricted areas, despite the increased security. On Sunday night, Marcus made what he knew would be his final covert mission. The new security protocols made access nearly impossible, but he had one advantage. His 23 years of service had taught him about emergency procedures and backup systems that newer security measures didn't account for. Using a maintenance access route that bypassed the main security grid, Marcus made his way to the record room. It was nearly empty now, with only a few boxes remaining, but the filing cabinet where he had found Queen Elizabeth's letter was still there, apparently overlooked by the cleaning crews. The envelope was still in the bottom drawer, and the key was still inside. Marcus photographed everything again and carefully removed the key, leaving the envelope and letter in place to avoid suspicion. As he prepared to leave, he heard voices in the corridor outside. "The renovation should be finished by Tuesday," someone was saying. "Make sure every inch of that room is stripped and cleaned." I want no trace of what was stored there. Marcus recognized the voice. It was Camilla's private secretary. They were planning to complete the elimination of evidence within 48 hours. He waited until the voices moved away, then made his escape through the maintenance route. But as he reached safety, Marcus realized he had probably been seen. A security camera he hadn't noticed during his entry had a clear view of the maintenance access point. By Monday morning, Marcus knew his time was up. During the morning briefing, the head of security announced that there had been a security breach in the restricted areas, and that all personnel would be subjected to enhanced screening procedures. Everyone's movements for the past week would be reviewed, and anyone found in unauthorized areas would face immediate termination and criminal prosecution. Marcus called Hayes immediately. "We have to move today. They know someone has been accessing restricted areas, and they'll figure out it was me within hours." Hayes had been working with his forger contact and had made contact with someone who could believably pose as an older Diana. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but it was their only chance to access the safe deposit box before the royal family realized what they were attempting. At 3 p.m., a woman who looked remarkably like what Diana would have looked like in her 50s walked into Weatherby Private Banking. She carried perfectly forged identification and Queen Elizabeth's key, along with a story about finally accessing materials her late former mother-in-law had left for her. The bank employee, working from outdated records, saw no reason to deny access to someone who appeared to be the legitimate account holder with proper identification and the correct key. Inside box 447, they found Diana's insurance policy against the royal family, recordings of conversations, copies of threatening letters, photographs of meetings she wasn't supposed to know about, and most damning of all, a signed confession from someone claiming direct knowledge of the plot to kill her. But as they photographed the contents, they didn't notice the bank's silent alarm system triggering. Within 30 minutes, both the police and palace security had been notified of unusual activity at the bank. Marcus was arrested at Windsor Castle at 4:30 p.m., charged with theft and unauthorized access to royal property. But by then, copies of Diana's evidence were already on their way to newspapers across Britain and Europe. The race was over, but the question remained. Would the evidence be enough to expose the truth, or would the royal family find a way to discredit it and protect their secrets once more? The story broke simultaneously across 17 newspapers in 6 countries at exactly 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Despite desperate last-minute legal threats from palace lawyers, the evidence Hayes had gathered was too compelling and too well documented for editors to ignore. The headlines were devastating. Diana's final warning: Royal Guard exposes cover-up. The letters Camilla burned, evidence of royal conspiracy. And most damning of all, Diana knew she would die. Audio evidence points to murder plot. Marcus sat in his holding cell watching the coverage on a small television, knowing that his life as he had known it was over, but feeling strangely at peace. The evidence was out there now, and no amount of royal power could put it back in the box. The contents of Diana's safe deposit box had provided the missing pieces of a conspiracy that stretched back over 25 years. The recordings revealed conversations where senior royals discussed Diana as a threat to the stability of the crown and explored options for permanently resolving the situation. Most shocking was a recording from just weeks before Diana's death, where she confronted someone about surveillance of her activities. The voice on the recording, confirmed by voice analysis experts, belonged to a senior royal family member who discussed making Diana's problems disappear in a way that looks completely natural. The signed confession found in the box came from Henri Paul, the driver of Diana's car on the night she died. Written hours before the fatal crash, Paul admitted that he had been paid to ensure Diana never reached her destination safely. He detailed exactly how the accident was planned and who had recruited him. Within hours of the story breaking, governments across Europe were calling for new investigations into Diana's death. The French authorities announced they would reopen their inquiry with access to the new evidence. Even the British Parliament demanded an emergency session to address the allegations. But the royal family's response was swift and devastating. King Charles appeared on television that evening, flanked by legal advisors and senior government officials. His statement was carefully crafted to acknowledge the seriousness of the allegations while casting doubt on their authenticity. These documents and recordings are either elaborate forgeries or have been taken out of context, Charles declared. The royal family has always cooperated fully with all investigations into Diana's tragic death, and we will continue to do so. However, we cannot allow baseless conspiracy theories to damage the institution of the monarchy or cause further pain to Diana's sons. The palace's counterattack was coordinated and effective. Within hours, they had assembled a team of experts who questioned the authenticity of the recordings, noting that technology in 1997 made voice manipulation possible. They suggested that the documents could have been created by someone with access to royal stationery and seals. Most effectively, they painted Marcus as a disgruntled employee with a history of financial problems who had been recruited by anti-monarchy activists to fabricate evidence. They released carefully selected portions of his personnel file, including notes about gambling debts and a recent divorce, to suggest he had motivation to sell fake stories to the press. Camilla, meanwhile, remained silent on the specific allegations but released a statement expressing her deep sadness that someone would exploit the memory of Diana for personal gain. She portrayed herself as a victim of a malicious campaign designed to destabilize the monarchy during a period of transition. The public reaction was explosive and divided. Diana's supporters rallied around the new evidence, organizing massive demonstrations demanding justice. Social media campaigns calling for the abolition of the monarchy gained millions of supporters within days. But the royal family still had powerful allies. Government officials worried about the constitutional crisis that would result if the allegations proved true. Conservative media outlets launched aggressive campaigns to discredit the evidence and paint the exposure as a foreign-funded attack on British institutions. Hayes found himself under intense scrutiny as well. His past work was examined for any evidence of bias or unreliability. Anonymous sources suggested he had fabricated stories before, though none of these claims could be substantiated. Death threats forced him into hiding, and several of his media contacts distanced themselves from the story. The legal battle was fierce and immediate. Palace lawyers obtained injunctions preventing further publication of certain materials, claiming they violated privacy laws and national security interests. They argued that even if some of the documents were authentic, their publication could damage ongoing criminal investigations and diplomatic relationships. But the damage was already done. Even as lawyers fought over what could be published, the core allegations had reached the public. Opinion polls showed that over 60% of British citizens believed the royal family had covered up evidence related to Diana's death, even if they weren't convinced about murder. International pressure mounted as European investigators demanded access to all the evidence. The United Nations called for an independent investigation, noting that if the allegations were true, they represented a violation of international law regarding state-sponsored assassination. 3 months after the story broke, Marcus was released from prison pending trial. The charges against him had been reduced to minor theft offenses as prosecutors struggled to build a case that wouldn't expose more royal secrets. He emerged to find himself a polarizing figure, hated by royalists as a traitor, celebrated by Diana supporters as a hero. The investigation continued, but its conclusions remained uncertain. Some evidence supported the conspiracy allegations, while other aspects of the story remained unproven. Voice analysis of the recordings was inconclusive, with different experts reaching different conclusions about their authenticity. What was certain was that the royal family's reputation had been permanently damaged. Public support for the monarchy dropped to its lowest levels in modern history. Calls for Charles to abdicate grew louder, though he refused to step down, insisting that doing so would be an admission of guilt. Camilla's role in burning the letters became a symbol of royal deception. Even people who weren't convinced about the murder allegations were outraged that she had systematically destroyed historical documents that belonged to the British people. Her approval ratings never recovered, and she became the most unpopular royal in modern history. As Marcus faced an uncertain future, he reflected on whether his actions had been worth the cost. The truth about Diana's death remained contested, but at least it was no longer buried in palace archives. The British people now knew that their royal family had hidden evidence for over 25 years. Regardless of what that evidence proved, Diana's sons, William and Harry, remained publicly silent about the allegations, but their relationship with their stepmother became noticeably more distant. Palace insiders reported that the brothers had demanded access to any remaining documents about their mother's death and had hired independent investigators to examine the evidence. The story that began with a royal guard noticing an unusual glow under a door had evolved into the biggest constitutional crisis in British history. Whether justice would ultimately be served remained to be seen, but the comfortable silence that had protected royal secrets for decades had been shattered forever. Marcus had kept his promise to ensure that Diana's voice was finally heard, even if the price was everything he had once held dear.